bonito es y lo quiero recordar. Bonito, bonito es. La vida es un gran poema, por eso vengo a cantar. La vida es un gran poema, por eso vengo a cantar. Con cada paso que pisas, mide si puedes llegar. Con cada paso que pisas, mide si puedes llegar. No más violencia, yo te lo pido, por favor. No vale la pena, la vida es vida y solo Dios nos la puede quitar. Que vale la pena, yo voy cantando, voy caminando, caminando voy. Que vale la pena, la vida es un gran poema y que viva la vida. The song was born in the South Pacific region of Colombia. It's a place full of beauty, but also full of pain. When I heard it sing for the first time by Daira Quiñones, who you can see in the picture, she is an incredible leader who was displaced from Tumaco by the armed conflict. Tumaco is a small town in the Pacific coast of Colombia. And when I heard that song, I just knew I had to go to the place she was singing about. This song became a turning point in my career. It took me and my partner, Adrián Sabogal, who is a musician and a researcher, to the heart of a region where music heals, where music also allows community to resist in the middle of the conflict, and where also music gave us a tool for reimagine that territory. My name is Gaviota Acevedo, as Armin was saying. I am a peace builder, I'm a singer, a political scientist from Colombia, and for me it's an honor to be here talking to you and sharing our experience. Before I start, I want to name something that is very important for me, is that, of course, what I'm saying is shaped by my own experience, but also it is shaped by the position I occupy in a society where inequality is high and where we have a colonial legacy. I grew up in Bogota, which is the capital of a deeply centralized country. I am a woman. I am also part of the second generation of a family who had access to education. I grew up in a lovely and supportive family. I had access to higher education, and that it's not something that common here. And I had the privilege of studying abroad, and all of that made it possible for me to be speaking to you today in English. English is not my first language, so please let me know if there is something you don't understand because of my accent or the way I express it. Don't hesitate to ask me to repeat things, please. So, well, I was sharing all this with you because I want to talk to you today, acknowledging all my privileges and my position. I don't want to replace the voices of the people that lives in the Pacific region, but I want to amplify that territory and all the learnings and like all the people I've learned from. And I hope that this helps that in the near future they can be the ones that can speak by themselves. So today I want to share the story of how systems thinking has helped me and Marimbea, which is the organization I work with, help us to shift the way we do and we think and we act towards peace building in that region. Okay, so as you can see in that picture, my story in the Pacific coast of Colombia started in 2014 when I traveled to Tumaco after I listened to Daira's song. There I am in that picture with my husband, well, my partner, who is now my husband, and with Maestro Juan, who is a great dancer and a great teacher. We are in one of the most beautiful beaches there in Tumaco. And as I was saying before, this story started with Daira's voice. She sung with a depth that I don't know, I can tell you that it gave me goosebumps. Because I think that song wasn't just a melody, it was also a testimony. She spoke about how music can be used as not only to denounce violence, but also to sustain and life and to narrate dignity in a place when everything where everything else is tried like is erased by violence. No, I wonder if some of you have ever experienced or listened to something that changed your life like that, but like what that, in my experience, I wonder if you have experienced something that without expecting it like allowed you to jump into the work you do today. Please just let me know, put in a dot in the chat if you ever experienced that, so I just feel like you are here with me and that I'm not speaking to a black screen. Let me see. Okay. Yay. So we are together in this. We heard that. Okay, so before I met Daira, I never heard about Tumaco in that way. I didn't know there was an armed conflict. Being a Colombian, I didn't know that there was an armed conflict that affected that region so profoundly. And that moved something inside me and pushed me to travel with the support of my sisters who helped me to pay for the trip that later became part of my undergraduate thesis on how music and silences were a tool of resistance in the Pacific coast. Once in Tumaco, something unforgettable happened. In that time, Tumaco is a place highly Catholic, it's mainly Catholic. And in that time, the Catholic Church was celebrating the canonization of Pope John Paul II, and the Mass was sung entirely by a local traditional marimba ensemble called Chango. The marimba is a traditional instrument that I will show you in a couple of minutes. And I know this may sound like just like a lovely moment of intercultural harmony, but during my interviews on that trip, I learned something that stunned me, and it was that years ago, during the colonization time, the church banned the marimba de chonta. They burned those instruments, they burned it, they put them in fire because they labeled them as instruments of the devil. Of course, when I saw that in the mass of the canonization of that pope, there were drums, people singing, there was the marimba in the center of the altar, then I thought like, whoa, this is an example of how music has become like a story of resistance, a story of memory, and a tool for also fighting against racism. For me, that moment was amazing, and it showed me that Tumaco people are not victims, like passive victims of the conflict or of racism of all their story, but it showed me that they are knowledge, they are guardians of knowledge. They heal through music, and they also are architects of joy in the midst of pain. So, for continuing with the story, when I returned to Bogota, the capital of Colombia, 2 years later, my husband founded Marimbea. So a dream was born. I want to explain to you why we called this organization Marimbea. So we named it after marimba, the traditional instrument that you can see in that picture, that it's made of jungle wood, jungle palms. And marimbea is an invented word that makes reference to the action of embodying the marimba de chonta, or to play it. But more than play it, it's like just to feel everything that is connected around the marimba, like the cultural heritage that is related with that instrument. Our first focus was very simple. We wanted the world and people in Bogota to know about that instrument, but not only about the instrument, but about all the stories that were intertwined, and not only like the nice stories of music, but also the stories of resistance. And we wanted to make people to be aware also about the conflict that was taking place in that region. So what we started doing was to bring traditional empirical musicians to Bogota to teach and share their music, share their stories about their territories in their own voice, because we didn't want to tell the story by ourselves. We want them to be like the leaders of those spaces. I remember our first Marimbea workshop in Bogota. I think like looking back, I see it with tenderness, but back then it felt really frustrating. We invited these traditional musicians, sorry, that hold deep ancestral knowledge, but few people from Bogota show up to the sessions. I think we were like young, idealistic, but okay, vested our savings on bringing those people to Bogota. They sleep in our coach, so we didn't have lots of resources, but we really wanted this to work. There were moments when I felt angry. I got angry, and I think back then I was looking like for something to blame, someone to blame. I thought like, people here doesn't care about other people in Colombia, even when we live in the same country. People in the capital don't value the knowledge they bring. Please drop another note in the chat if you ever felt like this in your own cause. I think starting like this journey of building peace can feel sometimes frustrating, but well, later on I realized that there was something deeper happening. The knowledge that the people from the Pacific brought was not always recognized as valid by cultural institutions or even by academia. Because those musicians didn't have like university degrees, formal degrees, and they didn't speak academic Spanish. They use their own traditional expressions. So many people saw them like less professionals. And I think that was both painful and illuminating, because it began to show us that racism and structural violence show up even in spaces that were meant to celebrate diversity, like places where you can share music, culture, academia. But there was like the first of many lessons. Sometimes problems is not like the problem there was not like a lack of interest, not necessarily, but it is that the systems where we live in, it has invisible rules about whose knowledge counts and whose knowledge doesn't count. So there was a time where I really felt like I wanted to give up, but I remember something that I admire deeply in my partner, in my husband. He's very stubborn, and he told me like, no, let's move on. There's a way that we can do this in another way. So we did. I feel very proud of showing you this collage, because it has some of the I'm sorry, I forgot the word, like the banners we use to promote our activities. So as you can see, well, these are just some of them, but we continue because we have that stubborn belief that we could find another way. So we did. And what we changed was that we started building our own spaces. So if a university didn't want to host our workshops, then we rented a friend's cafe. Also, cultural centers, they didn't give us room, then we used a bar, and little by little something beautiful began to grow. Eventually we were able to pay the musicians well and to treat their knowledge with the dignity it deserves. And also we cultivated a network of friends, allies, and artists who believe in what we were doing. So our dream has been supported till now by that amazing network of people who trust in what we were doing. Passed by, and we continue to bring musicians to Bogota to teach. And as we gained experience, we saw something. We discovered something, and that was that music wasn't isolated. Music was an entry point to an entire cultural world. The songs that the musicians taught were usually related with other topics. They always mentioned, for example, biche, which is over here. Can you see my pointer? Okay. Biche is a traditional fermented drink produced by communities in the Pacific coast. They also talked about encocados, which are delicious coconut-based dishes that I hope you once have the chance to try. They talked about pianguar, which is all, it's kind of a shellfish gathering in the beach. And they talk about so many other things, artisans, nature. So okay, I want to share with you some music, because I don't want just to describe it, but I want you to have a little taste of it. So let's listen to an example. This song is called Los Bebedores. It's composed by a group called Semblanzas del Río Guapi, and it is part of another a project we worked in during the pandemic. It was like a record. We recorded a series of virtual courses that you can find in Udemy, and all the money that you pay for that goes directly to the artists that recorded it. So okay, I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm just going to show you, so you have a taste of this music. Please let me know if you can hear it properly. Okay, so I'll stop it there. It's an amazing song, and this music, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. I hope you can keep listening maybe later to it. I will leave you the links to it. This song specifically talks about the people who drink biche, and like all the celebrations around that drink. So coming back to the story, after some of the sessions that we held in Bogota, participants began to tell us like, hey, we don't just want to sing about this, we want to taste the food, we want to try biche. And that's when we realized that music was an opening door to a much deeper cultural experience. And we started to evolve the workshops we did. We began to work with a displaced women's collective, and they were the ones in charge of food. So they lived here in Bogota. They were displaced by the armed conflict, but they were the ones that prepared the food that then we shared at the end of our sessions. And then music started to become like full cultural gatherings. So there was music, storytelling, dance, food, and it was an opportunity for people that were from the Pacific, the ones that we brought, but also that these communities of displaced people that were here, to sell their products and to also narrate their stories. Later on, one of the participants asked us like, hey, why are we learning all this in Bogota? Why don't we go to the Pacific? Of course, that implies lots of challenges, because that region is still deeply affected by the armed conflict. Not all the regions, but most of them. So, but we started to think about it. So in 2018, we organized our first musical retreat in the Pacific coast. We did it first in the northern coast of the Pacific. That is not where we work today, but we did it because it was safe. There is no active conflict in that specific place where we did the retreat, but we didn't have experience back then. Later, these experiences we moved them to the south of the Pacific, thanks to the support of a project we did with a USAID program called Territorios de Oportunidad. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. First, I want to talk about what is Marimbea today. So, as you can see in that graph, today Marimbea is an organization that has several lines of work. We led training processes to build capacity in the Pacific coast. We promote intergenerational exchange between elders, women, and youth organizations that work work with artists and cultural workers. We co-create cultural experiences and projects with those communities. And we also serve as a bridge between the Pacific communities and wider opportunities at international and national levels. Our approach is rooted in the Pacific, but it also speaks from the Pacific to the world. So we have those two lenses. However, I don't want to go deeper on the different lines we work today. I want to focus on one powerful line of work, which are the community-based and cultural retreats that we developed since, and we started to imagine since we heard Daira singing. Okay, after continuing with the story, I want to situate you like geographically. This is a map of Colombia. This is Colombia in the world. And as you can see in the arrow, when I refer to the South Pacific coast of Colombia, I'm referring to the coastal line of this region that is embedded in three departments: Nariño, Cauca, and Valle. This region, I wasn't able to draw it here, but this region is separated by much of my country by the western arm of the Andes mountain. So that is one of the explanations, not all of them, but one of the reasons why this region has been historically neglected by the national government. Also, it has high levels of poverty and it's home to a majority Afro-Colombian population. There are other indigenous communities that live there, but the majority of its inhabitants are Afro-Colombians. As I was sharing with you in the beginning of this story, the Pacific Coast is a place of deep wisdom and cultural richness, yet it is also marked by structural racism, illicit economies, and the armed conflict. The Pacific region is a strategic route for taking out drugs of Colombia to Panama and then like to the rest of the world. So coming back to our retreats, our first retreat took place in Nuquí at the north. So as you can see, it was out of the Colombian South Pacific coast. Nuquí is also a beautiful town. What we did back then was to rent an existing hotel, which wasn't community-led, community-run, and we organized a musical workshop there with one of the musicians that we brought from Cauca in that opportunity. Even when it was a powerful and emotional experience, it didn't yet reflect the systems-based approach that we would later embrace and that I would like to share with you today. Thanks to the support of USAID, we were able to design a new project rooted in systems thinking. This time we worked hand by hand with the community and we co-create those cultural touristic retreats from the ground up. We used a bottom-up strategy, and that's the project I want to focus today. That's the project I'll talk about today. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at how systems thinking began to play a role in this story. Around 2017, I was working at Fundación Ideas para la Paz, which is a think and do tank here in Bogota, and which was an amazing school for me for learning how to apply in systems thinking, because there I had the opportunity to take an online course on systems practice. That I was able to do that course thanks to the support of Humanity United, and also I had the opportunity to receive a mentorship from the Omidyar group. They helped me to explore how systems could support peace building work. But that was like a separate work I had back then. I work as a researcher in that Think and Do tank. But as an artist and as a political scientist, before that initiative from Humanity United, I had never learned about systems thinking before. So that was a big door for me. Little by little, my husband and I began to reflect on how this systems thinking lens could help us better understand the complexity of the work we were doing with Marimbea. And we thought that was a good opportunity to design more impactful initiatives. We realized then that we were part of a system and that we could help to shape that system. So now I'd like to share a few reflections on how systems thinking become part of our practice at Marimbea. I want to start by explaining how we've come to understand systems thinking in Marimbea. Then I'll share some of the systems thinking principles that have helped us the most in our work. And then I would love to share some lessons that we learned from applying this way of seeing and acting. I hope some of these reflections can resonate with your own work. And there I put the link of that Acumen course in case you want to check it out. It's super nice. Okay, so what is systems thinking? I think for us it is a mindset. It has been a mindset. As in the image, it's like wearing a pair of glasses that helps us to see the world from a different perspective, like a broader, more interconnected perspective. And it also comes with a set of tools like loops that I will talk about them in a minute, that you may or you may not choose to use. It depends on the context you work and if you find it useful or not. Systems thinking, it's especially helpful when you deal with complex problems, which are problems that don't have like a clear linear cause and an effect, such as more of our contemporary challenges: poverty, inequality, war, authoritarianism. These lenses help us to focus on relationships between different parts of a system, the structure that holds those systems together, and also the patterns that sustain those structures. Okay, so let's begin by asking or understanding what is a system. I think one of the clearest and simpler definitions come from Donella Meadows. She's a great, like a foundational thinker in systems theory, and she defines systems as a set of elements that are interconnected and interact in ways that produce and function and produce a function or purpose. So there in that definition we can identify three elements that are key to the definition. So the elements that are in green, the interconnection, and the purpose of that system. Donella Meadows, in her book Thinking in Systems, which I highly recommend if you want to start learning about systems thinking, she uses I think a fun and simple example to understand better this concept of a system. She uses the example of a soccer team. So there you can see Colombia's football team during the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. I put it there because maybe you remember them dancing the Rastastas, a rhythm that went viral that year. Okay, so in the example of the soccer team, the elements of the system will include the players, the coach, the ball, and even the field where they play. Then the interconnections of the system are made up of the rule of the game, the team strategies, the way the members of the team communicate amongst them, and even the laws of physics that affect how the ball moves during the game. Also, we have the purpose of the system. And it depends. It can be winning the match, winning the World Cup, or entertaining the audience dancing the Rastastas. Perhaps they also want to make money, they want to stay fit, or all of those examples. So what like this definition shows us that understanding a system is not just about seeing the parts of that system, but seeing how those parts connect and how they work together to obtain a result. Okay, so now that we explored what is a system and how it functions, I want to go back to my story. So the retreats we started organizing with Marimbea let us apply some principles of systems thinking that I want to share with you. As part of that project, we co-designed with the communities a 6 days and 5 nights cultural and community-based retreats in Tumaco, the same place where I I show you the first picture, and they are open because we still do those retreats. They are open to anyone who wants to learn directly from local communities. There you can see some of the pictures of our retreats. During these retreats, participants are guided by Afro-Colombian artists, cultural leaders who are deeply rooted in the territory. They learn how to cook traditional recipes, they dance to traditional rhythms, they also play ancestral instruments, and they also explore traditions like Décima Cimarrona, which is a poetic storytelling form that is unique to that region of Colombia. But I don't want to talk about this. I want you to see how it works. So let us see what the participants and the community said about this retreat.
Para nosotros es muy importante que conozcan nuestro proceso, que puedan llegar acá, que puedan interactuar, parte de la Fundación Tuma, y que puedan conocer esa experiencia sin el instrumento.
Some of us are musicians and some of us are not musicians in the group, but there's a it's the creation of a safe space to explore your musicality, your rhythm, the universal connection that we all have.
The setting, the people, the general experience is just phenomenal, and what more could you want? It's just escapist. Yeah, it's just great. Come, why wouldn't you want to?
Primero que me gustó fue la integración de todas estas organizaciones tumaqueñas, que normalmente eso no pasa acá en el territorio.
I often go to places I'll watch hip hop. I don't get to make hip hop, but here I got to be a part and play with some absolutely incredible and legendary musicians.
Para mí es muy relevante porque las tradiciones afrocolombianas conectan muchas partes del mundo con el Pacífico, que pues en últimas ha sido una región muy olvidada por el gobierno central.
I'm listening to music all around the world and writing about music from all around the world, but usually seeing it from an outsider's perspective, and I was really interested in the opportunity to come and get more of an inside view of what this music is about. And I must say, in the workshops, you really start to feel that you're doing that.
Porque y de eso hemos salido.
Hemos dado y también hemos recibido.
Y por eso me siento contenta.
Para nosotros es muy importante que esto se replique y que el mundo lo vea.
Es importante rescatar lo que se está perdiendo y que esto sea visible para, ¿cierto?
Que estamos gestando cultura, que estamos haciendo paz.
El poder que tiene la música, el poder que tiene el arte, diferentes culturas, diferentes lenguas.
The way that the program works to introduce people and integrate people is just fantastic.
Cuando estamos en el momento y el compartir musical o de la danza, somos uno solo. La danza nos conecta.
Somos uno. Juntémonos el mundo.
Buen viaje, buen viaje. Este embarca y se va. Buen viaje, buen viaje, buen viaje. Este embarca y se va. Buen viaje, buen viaje. A la gloria se va. Buen viaje, buen viaje. A la gloria se va. Buen viaje, a la gloria se va.
So what you just saw there was something that we didn't design alone. We spent the first 6 or 7 months of our project holding collaborative sessions with musicians, cultural workers, cooks, elders, youth, women's collectives, local tourism entrepreneurs, and cultural leaders. And we built together the vision, the values, and the structures of these retreats. Like what we embraced in this project was were some of the systems thinking principles that I want to share now with you, and those were very meaningful to shape the way we work in that project. Let me go to the next slide. So I'll share 5 systems thinking principles that shaped our practice. One of the first principles that we applied was this one: don't focus on events, observe patterns. Going back to the beginning of our story, when few people came to our first events, we could have focused on that isolated event, like on our first workshop where no one or like 4 people show up. But there was an underlying pattern, structural racism that was being replicated by some circles within the academic world and the cultural sector. And those circles were devaluating the knowledge of Afro-descendant communities. So we didn't just fix the event like our workshops, but we recognized that the system we were embedded wasn't neutral and that we needed to work around it, not within its terms. One of the patterns that we uncovered with artists and cultural leaders during this project was what we later called the invisibility loop. It helped us to understand why certain forms of exclusion keep repeating over and over, even when there are good intentions. Before I share this example of this loop, I want to say something important, and is that in systems thinking, there are many ways to observe complexity. Feedback loops are just one tool among many, and you don't need to create these loops to practice systems thinking. You can also send systems through conversations, stories, but we we wanted to give it a try to build these loops in community. So I'm going to show you an example of a reinforcement loop that we built with the community. So these feedback loops are visual ways to show different elements in a system that influence one another over time. Specifically, reinforcement loops, like the one I'll explain later, show how certain actions or conditions can amplify themselves, like a snowball rolling down a hill. So this is the invisibility loop. As you can see, what we uncovered was that limited access to formal university education often leads to low recognition and value of ancestral knowledge, and that in turn makes that there are lower levels of inclusion, so musicians or cultural workers of those regions have not access to funding resources or are not part of decision-making spaces. And that in turn, what does is that it undermines the capacity, the options those cultural workers and artists have of economic prosperity. So they keep living in poverty, in the margins of poverty, and they don't have access to work benefits or to stable sources of income. And that cycle repeats and repeats over and over. But we found out that this loop will keep repeating itself unless something intervenes to break that cycle. Like, for example, validating the knowledge that those cultural workers bring, opening space for them, or even changing the narrative about the place where they live. We identified that yes, loops can be powerful tools for gaining clarity, but the real power on using them is to understand like the deeper relationship structures and beliefs that keep those patterns repeating over and over. Looking at that loop, we were able to identify a leverage point of change. We realized that invisibility wasn't only cultural, it was structural, and many of the artists lacked the connections and access they needed to make their work visible, to apply for funding opportunities, amongst others. And that's why at Marimbea, one of our most important roles has become acting as a bridge connecting Afro-Colombian artists with platforms, networks, founders, education opportunities, and resources that can amplify their voices and support their work. Okay, I'll try to move a little bit faster. So another key principle we learned from systems thinking is that we need to see the whole forest, not just the tree. At first, we only worked with local cultural organizations, and that was essential. But as we started co-designing those retreats, it became clear that local partnership was not enough. So artists, we also need to live with dignity. They need to eat, they need to pay rent, raise their kids, pay for their education. So we had to look at a wider system. We need to connect those local creators with global networks, with income generating opportunities and knowledge sharing scenarios. Organizations like In Place of War help us to do that. They supported our first pilot in Tumaco and facilitated mentoring sessions with artists to make their ideas go stronger and more connected to global networks, donors, festivals, and academic spaces. And we know that scaling impact means weaving local depth but also global connections. Sorry, I forgot to mention that In Place of War is an international organization. It's located in the UK, so that's why we start like seeing not just the forest, like in Tumaco, but also like the other countries in the world. Another key principle of systems thinking is don't look at the flower by itself, look it in connection with the water, the sun, the soil, and the forest. In Marimbea, as I already shared with you, we began working only with music, with musicians, but we quickly saw that music lives in relationship to food, to territory, to gender roles, to dance, to memory, to violence, to story. So systems thinking helps us to use the ecosystem, not just the individual like aspect of music. Other core principle of systems approach that resonated with our work is that wisdom is within the system. We can't assume solutions come from the outside. The knowledge that guides our work isn't imported. It lives in the voices and bodies of Afro-Colombian Pacific people, and we see ourselves and the other actors that we invite to join to this initiative as a bridge that helps to amplify what there's already in the territory. And finally, we understood that relationships are a critical part of a system. Who is included, who is excluded, who speak, who has power, who decides. These are all system dynamics, and that's why we invest a lot of time and resources building trust, revealing and understanding power structures between the actors we work with, and practicing transparency and reciprocity. Additionally, we learned that part of building peace is helping people and ourselves acknowledging our identity as part of a system, naming like if people realize that they are part of a system that allows them to imagine that they can build a change from within the system, that they have agency to change the system that we are working in. Here is a summary of the 5 systems thinking principles that shape our work. I wonder if some of them feels most true to your experience right now. Please feel free to write the number of the principle that you think resonates with your work, just to check if we are together, we are still together in this conversation. Let me check the chat. 5, great. Thank you, Sophie. Okay, so now that we learned from okay, sorry, I'll repeat that again. Now I want to share with you what did we learn from all this. I want to share briefly some key insights and lessons that emerged from applying system thinking through this process. So one of our key learnings was that nurturing relationships across the system is absolutely essential. As you can see in the picture, we created intentional spaces for connection, not just like formal sessions for planning, training, or dialogue, but also simply moments to coexist, to share presence, to enjoy each other's company. We laughed together, we danced, and most importantly, we shared all our meals. And these moments that were both structured but also spontaneous, we allow us to observe closely like the relational dynamics that were shaping the system we were working with. We identified where friendship existed, where we identified tensions or competitions, and this relationship awareness help us to better understand how the system was really functioning and how can we support a healthy transformation of that system. I will give you a short example. For example, among some of the artists, we noticed that the low demand and scarce opportunities had created like a sense of rivalry or competition amongst them. So part of our strategy for tackling this was to hold an appreciative inquiry session where we invited each organization to identify their unique strength, so that strength can become part of the retreat, and this helped to shift the energy from competition to collaboration. We also learned that collective agency matters more than outsiders' leadership, that interdependence builds community power. Each person carried a piece of their territory's story, but it's only together as a collective that they could tell the full narrative of Tumaco. And we also understood that that sense of we need each other to build together is something that systems thinking bring into the surface. We also learned that building a shared vision is also a form of peace building. Through dialogue encounters, the group we worked with began building a shared narrative of their future, how they wanted their territory to be seen and lived during those retreats, and we also identified certain clues of how will we identify if what we were doing was what we were expecting, and this vision become an anchor for action. Additionally, we learned that diversity of voices strengthens the system. We intentionally brought together people from different generations, backgrounds, access to resources, and levels of power. Elders, youth, women, musicians, cultural managers, local organizations, international NGOs, and community mentors all participated, and that diversity made the design process of those retreats richer. And finally, another important lesson is that art is not decoration, it's infrastructure for peace building efforts. I know we could spend an entire session just talking about the contributions of art to peace building, and I truly hope there will be more spaces like this one so we can all share our experiences. In Marimbea, we also recognize that art carries risks. It can be used as for manipulation, for propaganda, or even to promote violence. But and we also recognize that not all art must serve a social purpose. Sometimes creating art for the sake of art is necessary, is beautiful, is valid too. But what I want to highlight today is that many peace building efforts, in many peace building initiatives, artists are invited only as performers, like to sing at rallies, to compose songs, and they are not always seen as strategic actors, and they are not usually included in the decision making process of these initiatives. And often, and this is very important, they are not even paid. There is money for other people, but not for the artists. In Marimbea, we are convinced that artists must be involved in peace building efforts from the very beginning, from planning to implementation to evaluation, and we believe that art is not just a decorative element, but a driver for peace and development. And above all, we believe that economic justice for artists must be part of any systemic change. So, supporting cultural workers with dignity, fair compensation, and long term opportunities is not a luxury, it's necessary if we truly want to build sustainable peace. Especially if we are committed to build sustainable peace in places deeply affected by armed conflict, as Tumaco and the Pacific Coast, where we hope that a life in the arts can become a meaningful alternative for making a life instead of joining to armed groups or illicit economies that takes place in those places. Before closing, I just want to share a couple of challenges that we experienced while doing this project. We identified that using feedback loops proved too abstract in community sessions. Looking back to what we did, I think it will be better, in next opportunities, just to have some conversations to then, as facilitators, draw the loops, and then going back to the community to ask if they agree with them or not. But perhaps the idea of the loops can be too abstract. So I think that a lesson of this is that these system thinking tools are very, or that specific one of the tool are very useful, but we need to adapt them to the territories we are working with, especially in territories like the South Pacific, where orality and collective reflections are what they usually do. They are not so used to building those loops or to drawing. Second, we didn't document the process in as much detail as we would like. I guess as that the beginning of those retreats, as we were being financed by USAID, I think we were more worried about like the results and doing the reports than documenting the process. So next time that is something we should improve. Also, we noticed that we need to get better at tracking unintended consequences of our project, not just the successes or the things that we plan, but also the ripple effects, both positive and negatives. There are some things that are nice of these retreats. We found out that some collaborations emerge between the tourists or the people and even artists that come to our retreats. For example, after a retreat, a group that was there in Tumaco recorded a disc with someone in another country. So those are like unintended consequences, but there are also negative that we need to track. But sometimes money, time, it's not enough to do it. But we are aware that we need to do so. And also, finally, we learned that we need to keep sharing the eye, keep sharpening the eye for continuing reading the systems with care, to keep learning about unspoken rules and social norms. We realize with time that at the beginning, when we were start to build trust, people didn't feel so comfortable sharing with us what they didn't like or if they feel uncomfortable. So we need to build trust and keep sharpening the eye to notice those things and keep working with them. I want to share a final thought of applying systems thinking to this project. And I don't know if you can see it. Yeah. It is that systems thinking reminded us that transformation is not only about changing what we do, but how we relate, how we listen, how we center others, and how we imagine change together. For finishing, I just want to say that I hope this conversation encourages each of you to pause and reflect and ask yourself, what systems are you moving through and what loops are you reinforcing with your work, and how might your practice, your art, your presence, the way you relate with other people become a small shift that creates a movement in a bigger system. If you're curious about the other work we do with Marimbea, I invite you to visit us, hopefully to travel with us to the Pacific. Thank you so much for your time and for walking with me through this journey. I invite you to follow Marimbea on social media. There's our QR for our Instagram, our webpage. Please, let's stay connected with our work, with our music, and the voices of the Pacific. Also, if you like to continue this conversation, or collaborate, or share reflections, ideas, I'm always happy to connect with each of you. And here are also my personal contact details, so feel free to reach out. Thank you. I think I will hand it over to Armin now.
Thanks, Gaviota. Really beautiful, and I love the way you just outlined so clearly what system thinking is and how it's reflected in your work. And now it's to Polly Walker to walk us through the system thinking elements a little maybe deeper.
I want to reiterate what Armine said. What a beautiful, compelling, and articulate explanation of systems theory and how arts can enhance peace building through a systems theory approach. So I really don't have anything new to add. What I see myself as doing now is illuminating some of the main principles that Gaviota wrote out and reaching for that simplicity on the other side of complexity, as John Paul Lederach says. So when I'm thinking about working with systems theory, I think about both disrupting those conflict attractors, those force fields that Gaviota described, made up of all those many elements and how they shape each other to keep these intractable conflicts in place. And at the same time, building a peace attractor. What are all the things we're doing that are building up peace and justice in a very meaningful and coherent way? And you heard her outline their first analysis of all those many feedback loops that were contributing to the violence in Colombia. And it seemed to me, Gaviota, and correct me if it's not accurate, but it seemed like you and your partner came to focus on one of the most influential loops there was that disrespect for and the marginalization of the ways of knowing and being of the Afro-Colombian peoples. And how can we disrupt that then through music? So again, I think, very sound analysis, a very comprehensive analysis. And I really liked your point too about how we talk to people about this. Do we use the language of feedback loops, or do we use other kinds of languages to come together and develop this group analysis? And I think that's one of the things that Gaviota so skillfully explained today. It's not an analysis done somewhere by someone with a PhD or a big consulting company. It's drawing on the wisdom and the knowledge of the group. And that's done through story. It's done through music. It's done through shared experience. And again, it's not a fixed analysis. So those of us who work with systems theory and peace building, it's a place you start. Always being mindful of what's going on around you and the larger society, in the world, in the natural world, in those relationships. So it's a fluid and continually changing analysis built out of these deep relationships. That, a lot of the resources that you mentioned are good resources for people to go towards. One of the things that you pointed out, I think so important, that can get lost when we're looking at this complexity and reaching for the simplicity, is that real clear awareness that we are a part of the system and we affect it. We can decide to do nothing. We're still a part of the system, and we're affecting it through our unwillingness to engage with that complexity or to bring our agency to bear. Or we can do as you and your partner have done, Gaviota, and engage with that complexity and engage in building those deep relationships to work with that complexity in ways that bring our agency into the system. So we're going to affect it one way or the other, but we can certainly be much more skillful in how we affect it through applying these elements. And one of the things that might find helpful is we have developed document that goes along with our toolkit in acting together. And it's questions that you can ask yourselves as you work through how might we address, a really complex conflict through a systems-based way. Happy to share those if anybody wants. I won't run through them now, but it's questions you can ask yourselves about how might you map these elements of the conflict, or how might you engage with complexity, or how might you work with this energy. So we're happy to share that document. And Gaviota, I'm so looking forward to staying in touch with you, because I have some examples I want to share about working with remote Indigenous communities and how working through this complex analysis worked in different ways. Because I really like the point you brought about that, just talking about feedback elements might not resonate with some people. And sometimes that can be done, through music, through dance, through performance. So again, I don't have a lot to say because Gaviota did such a brilliant job, but it's holding in our mind that conflict system and the peace system, working to disrupt this one and working to build this one, doing that through deep relationships and deep analysis. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy so people can ask Gaviota questions.
Wow, it's really very nourishing time to spend together. Thank you, both Gaviota and Polly. So I would like to just encourage folks to raise your hands to ask a question or put something into the chat. And Armina is going to help me see where the questions are. Okay, so Luis, nice to see you, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to see you. Nice to see everyone. Cynthia, well, Gaviota, it was a fantastic presentation. My name is Luis Carlos Sotelo. I'm Colombian. I am professor in the Department of Theater at Concordia University in Montreal, where we have a project that it's called the Acts of Listening Lab, and we engage with related questions about art and performance, and not necessarily peace building, but transitional justice and restorative justice. So it's connected. And so I'm fascinated by your project, and I would like to continue the conversation in any case, but I cannot help but ask a question that I think it's relevant for all of us who are in this group, and that is, you asked the question, like system theory helps you ask the question about relationships, who is there, who speaks, and I want to add a question, which is my focus of research, who listens, right? And who listens? And I am asking this because I want you to please share with us if the examples that you show with the people from the project in place of work coming to the retreats and etc., if you consider them prototypes to thinking about eventually later how to bring into those retreats people who are in conflict. So it's relatively easy to bring, tourists, so to speak, cultural tourists who are interested in these topics. And it's very complex to bring in the people who are actually threatening the very musicians and human rights defenders and other people. So the parts who are at war, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be obviously a complete different level to bring them together. So that my question is, well, did you try to bring them together or not? And would you consider the projects that you show us prototype to perhaps, adventure later, more difficult, more complex retreats? That's my question.
Go ahead, Gaviota. Yeah.
Thank you, Luis Carlos, for your question. It's a very interesting one. I think that I wouldn't say this is a prototype because I think that every context and every like the situation you are bringing, it's different from what we are doing. But I think that some principles like centering local voices, building a shared vision, fostering relationships can be used also in that scenario that you are suggesting. We haven't given it a try. We haven't had the chance, or I think we haven't think before of bringing together victims and perpetrators of violence. I think that will require another expertise. It will be interesting to explore that, perhaps with the support of people who have worked in that field of transitional restorative justice, perhaps. I think that music is a powerful tool, and in general cultural practices, to evoke a shared future and to bring people to sense together a place, but that will require special preparation. I think like just thinking in eraser. I don't know if that's a word, like a draft, like thinking in a draft. I think it will be nice to design something where you first invite, for example, perpetrators and victims in separate spaces to experience culture and music, and then after like a cautious and well designed process, then you can start bringing them together. But I would love to explore ideas in the future. We haven't done that yet.
I know, because I know some of the folks here in this conversation, that there are people who have had some experience bringing people from opposite sides of conflict together through artistic practices. And I wonder if anyone would like to share some of those experiences briefly to kind of point our thinking in that direction. I mean, I'm thinking maybe Armina, you'd like to share something about your work with Turkish and Armenian women as one example.
Yeah, so I should, yeah, the project that Cindy is mentioning happened back in 2016 and 17, or even 15 and 16. And I should say that we brought together women from Armenia and Turkey from bordering areas in one kitchen to kind of create this space where they could get to know one another a little bit better, because they are separated from long lasting political conflict and close border, and they are full of prejudices towards each other. And so we brought them into one kitchen to make them cook together, meet, and share their stories. And I should say that this was happening in a political climate which was slightly more enabling than what we have now. And it was kind of a nice way to create that space where they could share their stories, and through those stories get to know the other perspective a little bit better. And I mean, now that politically we are in a worse place, I'm just, yeah, it's a different time, a different situation. And it was painful to see how those relationships that were so much nourished and nurtured during the project was kind of challenged quite a bit when violence erupted between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But Turkey, always supporting Azerbaijan, had a big role, and how those relationships were challenged and how those contacts were kind of, I would say, compromised when violence re-erupted. Yeah, just briefly about that experience. And I think Lori Marshall has her hand up, and then we have a question from Sophie in the chat. Cindy, if you wanna.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can come back to this this question later if you want, but Laurie Marshall, you have a hand up. Yes, you're muted.
I wanted to share a project I did with students who were in rival gangs in Northern California. One student had lost his cousin to the other gang, and there were other students in the room who were from that gang. And I had them focus on the forest and not the trees. We made a collaborative mural structure inspired by the Owerri Igbo of Nigeria, who take kids when they're in 9th grade, basically, and have them make sculptures to their ancestors and to their children and to their animals. And we made this collaborative sculpture, and the boy who lost his cousin made a picture of his cousin who was murdered by the other gang. The boy who was in the other gang made a sculpture, not a picture, sculpture of his new baby that was on the way. And they got to see each other's humanity, and they worked on something all together that was hard and challenging. And it was transformative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this amazing conversation. You are my people that I've been longing to connect with for decades. So thank you. Impact. And
so there's a question here from Sophie in the chat. I'll read it, and then Sophie, if you want to add anything. She writes, I'm wondering, Gaviota, you said you are a political scientist. I would like to know how you combine your work at Marimbea with your research and how your academic work might have impacted your practical work.
Thank you, Sophie, for that question. Sometimes I feel like I am two persons in one body. Like there is my artistic being and my academic being as a political scientist. But I think that they interact within each other very well, because studying political scientist made me very aware of power relationships and power dynamics. And that has allowed me to do a different work in Marimbea based on how we learn about those relationships and how we read the context. As I was saying before, who is given a voice, who can participate, who takes decision. I've been learning how to facilitate dialogues. I'm in that process, learning how to do it. And it's something I'm very interested in. And on my master's degree, I research on power dynamics in dialogue facilitation. And I think that was very useful during that project and on the work we do in Marimbea, to learn how to facilitate the spaces where we identify patterns. And I think that's a necessary analysis that we should do when we work in arts. I think that sometimes as an artist we don't have that training to see or to read those dynamics. Yeah, I think it's a fortune that I can have the chance of have that academic training and put it into practice in the field.
Lee, can I take the opportunity to ask you if there's anything on this? I mean, you're aware of so many artistic endeavors, including your own, to work in conflict situations and to bring people together across differences in Cyprus. And I know that you were recently in Serbia at a human rights and peace building theater festival. Is there anything from this conversation that you would like to share or contribute from your experience or your many experiences?
Thanks, Cindy. I think the main point I would share in the context of the overall conversation and Polly's reflections and the wonderful presentation is a lot has to do with the setting. You mentioned the festival, the wonderful Da Theater's biannual Arts and Human Rights Festival, where IMPACT also collaborated in the program that Armene mentioned in the introduction, the Hope Project. Bringing together in a festival context individuals from countries or societies that are in conflict is a different setting than an intentional project. With obviously notwithstanding the specific goal, whether it's a transitional justice goal or if it's a explicit peace building goal. So I think festivals, having researched the exceptional Buffer Fringe Festival in the island of Cyprus, and literally a week ago in a festival, there's something magical about the possibilities of sparking connections between participants in both planful and spontaneous ways, as opposed to intentional peace building and transitional justice program. I had many years of experience in what's become a very sort of in the same kind of gloomy mood that Armenia was conveying about her project. I can share about Israel-Palestine. It's the arts, and whether it be music or theater, right now in the Israel-Palestine context, they're really support mechanisms for protest. That's the major role of how I think arts and creativity now, as opposed to a major tool of peace building. They're so key now in all the protests to stop the war in Gaza, the killing in Gaza, and those who've opposed the war in Iran. So these are just some sort of off the cuff thoughts, but this has really been a wonderful gathering. I'm very appreciative.
Polly, I'm also just thinking about your many experiences focusing on the conflicts that arise between Indigenous people and the descendants of settlers, and the importance of, or the role of, honoring Indigenous ways of knowing and being and cosmologies in peace-building work in those contexts. I just want to know if there's anything you would want to share from insights from those experiences, because they might be kind of directly relevant or leaning against this work in the Afro-Colombian community.
Connecting both with Gaviota's work, but the point that Lee just raised, about doing this work in the dark times. I lived for 16 years in Australia and worked very closely there with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who were bringing together Indigenous peoples who had suffered a wide range of injustices with the descendants of colonizers in Australia. And the same thing here in what we call Turtle Island, what many of you call North America, bringing together native nations and descendants of colonizers, and addressing both the historical harms but the ongoing harms that arise out of those. And I think what Lee said there's really important. It's bringing people together in ceremony is the work that I've been involved with, and people who do this in very deep and meaningful and ongoing ways. And in ceremony, you have dance, you have prayer, you have music, you have feasting, you have connection with the natural world, connection with the elders. And it's a systems-based approach through an Indigenous lens, because it always focuses on relationships. And that's both relationships with others in your community, with others from opposing or enemy communities, with your relationships with the natural world, with the ancestors, with the generations to come. There's also systems-based in that it's in many Indigenous worldviews, and certainly in Native worldviews in Turtle Island, everything is interconnected. And you have to be aware of and constantly learning about those interconnections and responding to those to stay at what we would call in balance and harmony, which is the term sometimes roughly translated into English as peace building. So I think it's both that, that reiteration of the importance of relationships, of being emplaced, and of that interconnectedness, but also that not always hitting at it directly. I mean, sometimes it's, done through the courts and it's done through treaties, but the work that I've been involved in is done through ceremony, which brings many, many different forms of what we call art together, but doing that in a relational and placed way. Does that answer your question, Cindy?
Yes. I mean, I wanted to let Gaviota and others know that your work in the Acting Together project, for instance, is available online for people to explore and learn from if you haven't been accessed it already. Because I think, well, it's fascinating to me that this systems thinking is permeating to so many different parts of the world and different practitioners working in different fields and through different art forms for sure. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but Tom, I'm just wondering if systems thinking is how that's present in your current or past work at the university or in through theater or performance, whatever else.
Thanks, Cindy. And hi, everyone else. It's good to see you. And thank you, Gaviota, for your talk, Polly, for your comments. For the last several years, I've been working in trying to use theater and performance to engage people with climate change and climate justice. And the thing that I've been thinking about really most during this conversation is one would think that people in this particular field would be very, very sensitive to systems thinking and to intersectionality. We make a lot of lip service to intersectionality, for example, around environmental justice issues. And we think a lot about how, in terms of climate being thinking about ecosystem, everything is in relationship, and we're transgressing so many different planetary systems at this moment. But the thing, and this is sort of what I would like some help with from the group, the response that I get among people who care about these things when it comes to thinking, not just, as you put it, Gaviota, not just about the flower, but also about the soil and the water and the sky and so on, is exhaustion. People will say, I'm spending all my time just thinking about bumblebees. I can't also think about too much phosphorus in the oceans. I can't also think about income inequality or housing. Or another example of this is, I'm an advocate for trees, and if you're telling me you have to cut down trees in order to get more housing for people, then we're going to be on opposite sides of this conflict, when of course we want both things. Both are necessary. So I guess my question for the group is, how do we, even among people with really good intentions, sort of get past this exhaustion about sort of seeing how everything is connected, rather than just the one little piece of the picture that they're interested in?
Yeah, it's interesting. My focus lately has been on, working with folks who are opposing authoritarianism in its various forms here in the US and here locally in Wilmington, North Carolina, and also globally. And this challenge of staying present to so much, and without becoming so overwhelmed and exhausted that you can't make a contribution in any space. And I think that it points to another potential contribution of artists and cultural workers. I just came from a conference where the contributions of musicians in the civil rights movement was very highlighted, and the capacity of music to lift people up, and to give them a sense of courage and to find spaces of joy that are nourishing, even when we're working on really, really painful things, really, really dangerous things. But I'm so glad that you raised that question, Tom, because, and I'm turning it to others if you have some ideas about how all of us can stay present to the many things that require thoughtful, compassionate, courageous attention and be effective. Anyone want to jump in here? I'm seeing names of people I don't know whose pictures I'm not seeing, but you're certainly welcome to dive into the conversation. At anyone.
I'd like to share some very helpful language from Valerie Carr, who is the founder of the Revolutionary Love Project. And this is a whole bunch of people put together, but she said it so beautifully that right now we are in the darkness of the womb, not the darkness of the tomb. We are in the darkness of creating a multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural, multi-class, multi-gender democracy that's never been seen on this earth, where we know the joy of diversity, we know the essentialness of interdependence, and we all have a gift that we came because we were born for this time. And using what brings you joy as the place to start is essential, because the fight is unbearable, it's overwhelming, and we're here together. So joy is the thing that gives us strength. Wherever you find it, that's yours to nurture.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Gaviota.
That was beautiful, Lori. Very inspiring. Thank you. I think that I just wanted to bring into the conversation something that it's very patent in the Afro-Colombian communities, and is that they resist through joy. They resist through their music. They play the drums. Even the music sometimes serves as a like a community. Sorry, I forgot the word. Duelo. Mourn.
Grief.
Grief. Thank you, Luis Carlos. For example, when a little kid or a little child dies, they will mourn together. They will grieve together, singing and surrounding the family of that kid. And that also takes place when we talk about armed conflict and all the inequalities they suffered. So they say they can take out everything of our communities, but they cannot take out our joy.
Yes.
I think, Tom, thinking about your grappling with that issue, looking at it through a systems theory lens, and what my response would be is that being present to everything is important, because we have to understand how everything's interconnected. But then it's also a part of a systems peace building practice, is that finding that point where you and your group can make the most difference. So you're not required to address everything. No one can do that. And then you burn out and you're depressed and hopeless. But be present to it and then decide, here's where we can act, because we can't act everywhere.
Well, I wonder if that's a place where we might want to close our conversation, thinking about joy and its importance. And
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
My Siri on my phone thinks I'm talking to her.
You don't get joy, Siri. Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Humans get joy.
There's I was just with.
I'm wondering if Gaviota might sing us a song to close. I'm sorry, Cynthia.
What a great idea.
Inviting yeah.
Yes. Gaviota, could you?
Sure, it will be my pleasure. Perhaps this song is not from the Pacific Coast, it's from Bogota, but I like to share it because it's also connected with like my journey as a peace builder, and I always sing it with my husband, where I am with my family, with my friends, and it talks about peace and how we dream that once in our life we can get to grasp the sense of it. Que las guerras no paren y vallas se enciendan y los odios se nos crezcan como inmensas cordilleras, aunque nuestras tierras verdes de rojo y sangre se vuelvan. Yo todavía creo, en el amor creo y en la paz también. Yo todavía creo, en el amor creo y en la paz también. Pues cuando hay paz, las nubes negras se van, podemos ver más allá de las estrellas. Y brotarán del corazón de la tierra los frutos y las ideas que harán la patria más buena. Por eso yo todavía creo, en el amor creo y en la paz también. Yo todavía creo, en el amor creo, y en la paz también. I still believe in love, and I also still believe in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaviota. And thank you for your whole presentation, and thank you, Polly. And Armine, I want to thank you also for the work that you did to organize this conversation and all the work you're doing for Impact these days. And I want to just know if there's any last word that you want to say on behalf of Impact.
I just want to say thank you so much, Cindy and Polly, for spearheading all this series, Gaviota, for your beautiful story. And like, I'm so happy that this place enables us to get to know such beautiful, wonderful people in this community. And I feel like really blessed to get to know you through this series. And I'm hoping for future partnership and cooperation. And I want to say that we will be announcing our future events within the Creating Hope Together virtual series soon. Stay tuned. And on your exit, a survey will pop up. We would really appreciate to get to hear your feedback on what you think about this series and this event in particular. So please take a minute to fill it in. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks.